and welcome to my backyard studio. Today we're going to be learning about how to create a plant dye bath. Hi there, my name is Carly and I'm an illustrator and a fiber artist, and I've been practicing with natural dyes for 3 years, mostly with plant dyes. And in this video today, I want to share some of that beginner knowledge and the beginner concepts that we want to grasp when we're starting with plant dyes. Once you begin on the path of using natural dyes, you start to turn over stones in the beginning that show you basic processes that will occur. And you start to realize that it's like a never-ending, unraveling fruit roll-up of possibilities. You can shift things with pH. You can use different types of mordants, which will change the color as well. It can be a little overwhelming. So I want to give some basic concepts to understanding dyeing with organic materials. Before we start our dye bath, you'll want to have your fibers mordanted. So mordanting is the process of preparing the fibers that you're using, cleaning them, using an additive to get them ready to chemically absorb that pigment out of the dye bath. So if you haven't done that yet, you need some tips on that. I have a video, how to mordant, which will show you a little bit about mordanting wool and cotton. So one of the first concepts we want to understand is the difference between a dye versus a stain. So a stain might permanently mark your clothing, but it's really just sitting on top of the fabric. And a dye can actually penetrate into the fiber and can chemically bond to the fiber. So another concept you're going to come across when you start researching natural dyes is this word light fast. And this is the potential that a color has to fade with light or UV rays hitting it. So some foods that we might think of that would be really good for dyeing, they might just be creating a stain. They might not be very light fast at all. One example of that is like cabbage dye, or even onion skin dye. It can really fade very fast after you get that first dip of color. But something like madder root, which we're going to be using today, has a great chemical bond, and that's why it's been used for so many centuries. So let's get going with that, and we'll learn how to extract the most pigment we can out of this plant. Rubia tinctorum, or madder root, is a dye plant that has been used across the world for many centuries. It's even been found in tombs in ancient Egypt. It is a low-growing plant, and its roots take about 3 years in order to build up enough pigment in them to dye with. Its roots also contain 15 different dye compounds. Alright, so to start out, we're going to need our raw materials. We have ground madder root and whole madder root that I got from Botanical Colors. We're also going to need a kitchen scale and some kind of stirring spoon, our kettle for hot water, and a jar. It doesn't need to be too big. Step 1 is to weigh out the proper plant material you want for the plant you're using and the amount of fiber that you're using. So you want to weigh the amount of fiber first and then refer to whatever recipe you're using that shows you the ratio of plant matter to fiber. Madder root is a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning that you will have the same amount of weight of plant material to fiber material. Versus something like red ironbark eucalyptus, you really want to just stuff as much plant material as you can in your pot because it's a 20-to-1 ratio. Second step is that madder root requires a slow process to break down. So I start by covering the material with warm water, about 100 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit, and I let that soak in a jar overnight. For most dye baths, I would skip this step and proceed with adding the plant to the pot with warm water. For your dye bath, I recommend using stainless steel pots or an enamelware, as these have a good heat efficiency. And another thing to keep in mind is that you want to have totally separate supplies for all of your dyeing rather than using things that you use in your kitchen when you're cooking. So keep those things separate. So now that it has sat overnight, fill your pot with the plant material and cover it with water. I recommend filling it till you reach a few inches from the top. This is so that when you remove your plant material, there will still be plenty of room for your fibers to submerge into. Bring the dye bath then to a boil and let it simmer for 60 to 90 minutes. Check on the bath, stirring it occasionally. Then cover it and let it cool after you've done the amount of time. Leave it to sit overnight. The next day, bring your dye bath to a steaming simmer again for 60 to 90 minutes. Same process. After this time, your plant material should be pretty exhausted. Most dye baths should deepen visibly, and I noticed this by the inability to see my spoon in the bath until I bring it close to the top of the water. For our last step, from here, your bath is ready for dipping your mordanted fibers. Good job! You can fully or partially remove the plant material using your strainer. Then replace the dye back into the pot and follow steps for dyeing your material. You can refer to my other video, How to Dye Fabric, for the best practices that I've found for dipping and dyeing your fibers. I encourage you to also refer to the blog post on my website at carlylake.com/sharing that explains these fundamentals and has the listed recipe and the steps. I'll also have some links there for books and resources for recipes to get you going and explore different kinds of plants. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have sparked interest in starting your own dye bath and your own journey with plants and organic dyes. So I would love to hear any comments or questions you have. Please leave them below. And if you're interested in anything else about natural dyes, about my art process, please let me know. Thanks again.